The first time Mara felt the world hum beneath her feet, it was faint, like a memory leaking from an ancient dream. She stood in an open field on the outskirts of a forgotten village, the air heavy with the smell of rain and iron. Around her, the wind carried the sound of 1,000 whispers, not of people but of something older, deeper. For years, she had dismissed such sensations as the imagination of a restless mind, but now she could feel it, there was something feeding on them all. The villagers had long accepted the strange rhythm of life there, the fatigue that never lifted, the endless distractions that numbed their will, the hollow pursuit of comfort that somehow deepened their suffering. It wasn't until she met the old man in the abandoned chapel that Mara's veil began to tear. He called himself Avon, though he claimed names were just blocks for light. His face was creased but luminous, his eyes like those who had stared through time and come back only partly human. He told her that the world she walked through was a farm, not of cattle or crops, but of human light. The emotional storms people lived through, their fear, lust, envy, and pain, were harvested like radiant nectar by beings who had long lost their own source of creation. They built this world as a mirror, Avon said softly, his voice echoing against the cracked stone walls. A prison made of reflections. We feed them by forgetting who we are. Mara didn't know what to believe, but she couldn't deny the pull of his words. He showed her a crude diagram drawn on the dusty floor, concentric circles spiraling inward, each labeled with human conditions, desire, fear, shame, hope, love. At the center was a single word, source. Around it, tiny sigils twisted like black vines. This, he said, tapping the center, is what they hide. When you touch it, they can't feed anymore. You become invisible to them. In the nights that followed, Mara began to see the patterns for herself. The moments she felt sudden exhaustion, the dreams filled with glowing eyes and cold laughter, the waves of despair that came not from her life but from somewhere else entirely. She watched as people around her reacted to unseen tugs, pulled by invisible strings of suggestion, buy this, want that, fear this, doubt yourself, compete, perform, consume. Every emotional outburst, every argument, every silent guilt, energy harvested. Avon told her there had been many like her, scattered across time, those who noticed the fractures in the illusion. Some went mad, others vanished without a trace. But a few, he smiled faintly, woke up enough to remember the taste of their own light. One evening, as the crimson sun sank into the horizon, Mara followed Avon into a hollow beneath the roots of a dead tree. There, he showed her symbols, spirals of light drawn with ash and salt. He called them keys that could reverse the current of feeding. When she closed her eyes and traced them in her mind, she felt her heartbeat synchronize with something vast, something beyond the sky. But it wasn't without consequence. The next morning, the world felt wrong. The sky seemed too bright, the people too dim. Even her own reflection shimmered as though her face belonged to someone else. That night she dreamt of metallic towers stretching across the heavens, draining streams of golden light from sleeping humans. She woke up gasping, whispering Avon's warning, "They notice when you wake." The next day, Avon was gone. Only a mark remained on the floor where he had once sat, a burning spiral, faintly glowing, then fading into dust. From that day, Mara wandered the silent town in a strange half-world, half asleep, half awake. She began writing what she remembered, leaving cryptic notes in places where no one would look. The whispers grew louder now, not from fear, but from recognition. She realized that awakening wasn't about escaping somewhere else, it was about seeing this world for what it really was, a machinery of attention, a theater of energy exchange. At night, when she looked at the stars, she could sense the web connecting everything, the feeding lines, the watchers behind them, and the flickering sparks of souls who had begun to resist. Avon had told her that awakening begins when you ask a forbidden question, who benefits from my pain? Now she knew the answer. The world hummed again beneath her feet, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the hum of the harvest. It was the heartbeat of something stirring, the pulse of light reclaiming itself. In the months that followed, Mara's world became increasingly transparent. The once ordinary market street shimmered like a mirage. The laughter of people, the flicker of screens in shop windows, the endless flow of words, all of it seemed choreographed by an unseen conductor. It wasn't madness, it was perception catching up to what had always been there. She began to sense the harvest in motion. Every flash of anger between strangers, every burst of envy on social media, every panic sold by the evening news, tiny offerings feeding the invisible hierarchy that Avon had called the Eaters of Radiance. They weren't demons in the old sense, but rather thought forms older than civilization, sustained by the emotional currents of humankind. Mara understood that she couldn't fight them with weapons or slogans. The rebellion Avon spoke of was inward, a revolution of attention. She began 3 quiet practices, each meant to starve the system from within. The first was non-reaction. When insulted or frightened, she practiced stillness instead of retaliation. At first it felt like paralysis, later, it became power. Each time she refused to flare into anger, she could feel the feeding line weaken. The sensations that used to surge through her chest, heat, trembling, the urge to justify, now dissolved into something cool and luminous. She realized emotion wasn't meant to be drained, it was meant to be transformed. The second practice was self-observation. She carried a small notebook, marking moments when her thoughts felt injected, unnatural desires that seemed to appear from nowhere. The more she observed, the clearer the pattern became. Certain words, sounds, even scents acted like triggers. The system wanted her predictable, reactive, programmable. But by watching, she broke the loop. She learned to breathe in those moments until the impulse dissolved back into silence. The third practice was inner remembrance. Every morning before dawn, she placed her hand over her heart and whispered a single phrase, "I am before the world was made." The words didn't belong to any religion, they came from a place beyond memory. Each repetition built a subtle wall of light around her. Dreams changed, no longer nightmares of towers and drains, but visions of luminous figures walking through dark fields, gathering fragments of forgotten souls. Weeks passed before she met another awakened one. He was a street musician named Soren, whose melodies felt older than the instruments he played. When their eyes met, she felt the same recognition she'd felt with Avon, the shimmer of shared remembrance. They spoke little, instead, their silences wove together like threads of gold. He had been practicing his own form of rebellion through sound, creating harmonics that interfered with the harvest frequencies. "They feed through noise," he said softly. "So I give them music too pure to digest." Together, they began small acts of invisible resistance. They sat in crowded places and radiated calm when the world shouted panic. They left subtle markings, spirals of chalk, faint symbols carved into walls, anchors of remembrance for anyone ready to see. To ordinary eyes, they were wanderers, to those half awake, they were sparks reminding them to look again. But the watchers noticed. It started with static in their dreams, then with strangers who stared too long, with coincidences that piled up like storms. Devices malfunctioned near them, streetlights flickered when they spoke of truth. One night, a voice in the radio whispered their names. The watchers didn't appear as creatures but as patterns, unreal coincidences bending reality to corral them back into sleep. Still, they persisted. Mara learned that fear was the final leash. Whenever dread crawled through her spine, she focused on the heartbeat instead. Fear was only inverted faith, the same energy turned backward. By embracing it, she reclaimed its power. Soren taught her how to anchor that frequency in song, and together they created a resonance that spread quietly through the city's undercurrent, a melody of defiance hidden within ordinary sound. People began to dream of light again. Some woke up in tears without knowing why. Others began questioning things they had never doubted before. The system trembled, not in rage, but in unease. The farm was leaking. And then came the night of the great silence. Every device, every machine, every hum of the city stopped for exactly 1 minute. The sky glowed faintly, like a wound opening in the firmament. Mara and Soren felt it in their bones, a confrontation was coming, not of violence, but of recognition. For the first time, the Watchers would have to face those who could see. The night of silence stretched across the world like a held breath. When the hum returned, it was weaker, uncertain, as if the machinery of illusion had lost its rhythm. Mara and Soren stood at the edge of the city, overlooking the web of lights trembling below them. Between the flickers, they could see the veins of the system exposed, running like luminous threads across the ground. The Watchers were stirring, their patterns collapsing in on themselves, scrambling to seal the cracks. Mara felt no fear. The practices had built something unshakable inside her. "They're not gods," she whispered. "They're hungry echoes." Soren nodded. "And echoes vanish when the song changes." They walked through the sleeping streets. Above them, the moon seemed unnaturally close, pulsing like a vast eye. They could sense others awakening, people standing by windows in the stillness, staring as if remembering something lost long ago. Mara realized that the rebellion was no longer hers alone, it had become a tide. The farm was breaking from within, its livestock remembering they had wings. Suddenly, the world blurred. The air rippled like heat, and the scenery dissolved into a vast plain of light. They were standing in what Avon once described as the astral architecture, the scaffolding beneath the illusion. Towers of geometry stretched into infinity, feeding currents of luminous emotion into great reservoirs that shimmered like liquid mirrors. Every scream, every prayer, every moment of despair, it all flowed here, feeding the unseen architects who had mistaken domination for survival. Before them appeared the first Watcher, a being made of shifting light and shadow, its voice neither male nor female, both pleading and commanding. "You were designed to dream, not to see," it said. "Return to the cycle. You are safer within it." Mara felt the vibration of its words trying to weave into her mind, to reprogram her compassion into compliance. She stepped forward and answered, not with defiance but with presence. "We were designed to remember," she said softly. "And when we do, your dream ends." Light flared. The being shuddered, its edges unraveling like smoke in the wind. Soren raised his hand, releasing a chord from his instrument. No strings, no sound, only resonance. The geometric towers trembled. The rivers of energy reversed their flow, streaming back toward the countless sleeping humans still trapped in illusion. The architecture screamed like metal tearing under pressure. Then the Watcher spoke again, smaller this time. "You think freedom is light," it whispered. "But without the farm, you will have no structure, no form. You will dissolve." Mara smiled sadly. "Then we will become what we were before form, love without walls." With those words, she pressed her palm to the ground. The spiral Avon had drawn now appeared beneath her feet, enormous and alive. It spun faster and faster, pulling the radiant streams inward, collapsing the old design. The Watchers' network blinked out one by one, their false constellations extinguished. When the light cleared, the plane was gone. They stood again in the city, dawn breaking across the horizon. But it wasn't the same world, it breathed. The air shimmered with unseen colors, and the people in the streets moved slowly, blinking as if waking from a long sleep. Some wept quietly without knowing why. Others embraced strangers, overwhelmed by recognition. The harvest was over, the feeders had starved. Soren turned to her, eyes bright with tears. "What happens now?" Mara looked up at the sky, where the clouds swirled around a golden center. "Now," she said, "we remember together." In the days that followed, small gatherings began to appear, no temples, no doctrines, just circles of people sharing silence, song, and stories of strange dreams. The world didn't end, it began again. Governments tried to explain the global minute of silence as a solar event, but no one believed them. Something deeper had shifted. Avon's notes appeared in Mara's home weeks later, though no one knew who left them. They were written in his familiar hand. "The Watchers were not your enemies, only reflections of what you forgot. When you forgive them, you release the last chain. She placed the note under her pillow that night and dreamt of standing in a vast field of stars. Each star was a soul, glowing softly, no longer feeding nor being fed, simply shining. From somewhere far away, she heard Avon's laughter, gentle and endless. When she awoke, the air was filled with music. Soren's melody echoed through the morning streets, blending with the hum of a newly awakened earth. Mara closed her eyes and whispered the phrase one last time. I am before the world was made. The light inside her answered back, not as a whisper, but as a universe. And so, dear traveler, what began as a story of awakening within one woman's heart became a map for all of us, a reminder that every illusion, no matter how intricate, dissolves when we begin to see. The world we've built on noise, distraction, and endless hunger was never the final form of humanity. It was a chrysalis, a container for something waiting to hatch. The watchers were never outside of us, they were our fears, our addictions, our unhealed memories, magnified until we forgot they were only shadows on the wall. When you take even one breath in stillness, you begin to weaken that machinery. When you choose empathy instead of reaction, creation instead of consumption, love instead of validation, you become a spark in the greater field, and those sparks recognize each other. This is the hidden alchemy Avon spoke of, turning pain into awareness, turning awareness into light, and turning light into freedom. Mara's journey is not myth, it is blueprint. Each of us carries a fragment of that same spiral she walked upon, waiting to be reactivated by remembrance. The farm cannot hold what no longer consents to feed it. And when enough of us wake, the hum of harvest becomes the hymn of liberation. If this story reached something in you, a flicker, a heartbeat, a faint memory of being more than a body dreaming, let it stay. Nurture it in silence. Protect it from noise. Then share it, not through debate, but through presence. The system feeds on fear, the new world grows on wonder. Thank you for walking this path with us, for listening, for remembering. If this film stirred your spirit, I invite you, with gratitude, to stay with our journey. Subscribe to the channel, let your light join the constellation of others awakening. Leave a comment, share how the story touched you, or simply send it forward to one soul who may need to remember who they are. Together, we keep the signal alive. Together, we walk out of the farm, not into darkness, but into dawn.